It started with a leak. Late on a Wednesday night, an anonymous whistleblower sent a 200-page dossier to Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett's office. The subject line read, Thiel's $6 billion shell game, tax haven abuse. At first, her team thought it was another baseless conspiracy theory. But as Jasmine flipped through the PDF, her jaw slowly tightened. The documents weren't rumors, they were bank statements, trust structures, overseas wire transfers, and internal emails, all tracing back to Peter Thiel. The tech billionaire, long known for manipulating legal gray zones, had apparently created a fortress of shell companies and Roth IRAs to dodge billions in federal taxes, all while funding political influence campaigns across the country. Jasmine looked up at her chief of staff. Get me a hearing. Public. Fast. By Friday morning, Jasmine Crockett had filed an official request for a congressional oversight hearing. The committee chair tried to stall her, claiming the evidence needed review. But Jasmine wasn't having it. She marched into the Capitol Press Gallery and stepped up to the microphone. Let me be clear, no billionaire should be able to buy silence, and certainly not immunity. I have evidence suggesting Peter Thiel avoided paying over $6 billion in taxes. That's not innovation. That's evasion. And the American people deserve answers. The room exploded with questions. Reporters rushed to tweet. Within the hour, her statement was trending, #Thiel tax fraud #Crockett exposes corruption behind closed doors, Thiel's lawyers began scrambling. One of them reportedly texted a lobbyist, she's not bluffing. She has the documents. We have a problem. Meanwhile, Jasmine's team was assembling a witness list, including tax law experts, former Thiel employees, and the whistleblower, who had agreed to testify under a pseudonym via secure video link. The hearing was scheduled for Wednesday. Washington was about to explode. Tuesday night, the Capitol was unusually quiet. But inside Jasmine Crockett's office, the lights were burning bright. She sat at a long conference table with her legal advisor, policy staff, and press coordinator. Pinned to the wall were flowcharts showing Peter Thiel's web of offshore accounts, Roth IRA manipulations, and a particularly damning memo labeled, Never Trigger an Audit, Q1 Strategy. Jasmine reviewed her opening statement one last time. It was bold. Maybe too bold. But she didn't care. I'm not here to play political games, she told her staff. I'm here to expose what they thought we'd never uncover. $6 billion. That's not a loophole, that's theft from the American people. Across town, Thiel was hosting a private strategy session at a D.C. mansion. Phones were locked. Guests were vetted. His team, including several former Treasury officials and high-powered attorneys, were already working on a counteroffensive, media spin, legal threats, maybe even political distractions. But there was one thing they couldn't control, the truth. And tomorrow, Crockett planned to drop it, live on national television. The next morning, the hearing room was packed. Reporters lined the back wall. Cameras rolled. Every seat was filled, and the tension was electric. Peter Thiel wasn't there. Instead, he sent his lead attorney and a tax expert on retainer. Jasmine Crockett took her seat at the center of the dais, calm but razor-sharp. She adjusted her mic and spoke first. This hearing is not about politics. It's about a billionaire who exploited the tax code to the tune of $6 billion, while regular Americans are nickel-and-dimed by the IRS. Gasps rippled through the chamber. She proceeded to lay out a timeline, how Thiel used a Roth IRA, intended for middle-class retirement savings, to funnel pre-IPO stock at fractions of a penny, ballooning it into billions tax-free. Then came the offshore trusts, the Cayman Islands Foundation, and internal emails referencing audit avoidance structures. She clicked her remote. The screen behind her lit up with one sentence from a leaked memo, keep total valuation under radar until next administration. Jasmine looked directly at Thiel's attorney. Can you explain what Mr. Thiel meant by next administration? Was he expecting a political favor? The lawyer squirmed. Congresswoman, I can't speak to that memo's context. Jasmine didn't blink. Then let's ask someone who can. She nodded to the clerk. Bring in witness one. The doors opened. A hooded figure entered, the whistleblower. The room went silent as the whistleblower took a seat behind the privacy screen. His voice was distorted through a modulator, and his identity hidden for safety. Jasmine leaned forward. Please state your connection to Mr. Thiel's financial operations. I was part of a private advisory team that managed tax strategy for his personal and investment accounts, the whistleblower replied. We were instructed to exploit every possible legal gray area, and sometimes go beyond them. Murmurs filled the room. Go beyond? Jasmine pressed. Are you saying there was intentional fraud? Yes. We created false valuations, misrepresented ownership structures, and delayed disclosures to dodge IRS scrutiny. There was a memo circulated internally, if it costs less to fight than to pay, we fight. The room erupted. Jasmine raised a folder. This memo? That's the one, the whistleblower confirmed. Signed by Thiel's financial chief. He knew. They all knew. Peter Thiel's lawyer jumped in. Objection, this is hearsay, this isn't a courtroom, Jasmine snapped. This is Congress, and you're under oath. She turned to the panel. Ladies and gentlemen, this isn't just a billionaire bending the rules. This is a coordinated scheme to defraud the U.S. government of billions. And while Thiel was doing that, he was pouring money into dark money PACs, lobbying for deregulation, and silencing watchdogs. The media feeds were exploding. Thiel fraud trended #1 in under 10 minutes. But Jasmine wasn't done. Next witness, please. Let's bring in the forensic accountant who traced the offshore transfers. The second witness was a seasoned forensic accountant, a calm, composed woman with a thick binder of financial records. She placed it on the desk with a loud thump that echoed through the hearing room. Jasmine welcomed her with a nod. Ms. Delgado, did you have the opportunity to review Mr. Thiel's offshore transactions? Yes. Over 14 months, I followed the movement of assets from domestic accounts into offshore trusts in the Cayman Islands, Belize, and the Isle of Man. In total, we tracked over $6.3 billion in transfers that were never reported to the IRS. Were these legal? Parts of them could be argued as legal, but taken together, with the intent and deception, they amount to textbook tax evasion. Jasmine turned to the screen again. It lit up with a damning image, a diagram showing funds flowing like a spiderweb across borders. These are the same funds he used to buy political influence, correct? That's correct. PAC donations. Super PACs. Educational nonprofits that promoted his ideology, all funded by money that skipped U.S. taxation. Thiel's lawyer interrupted again. This is an outrageous mischaracterization. My client has followed the law, Jasmine cut him off coldly. Your client followed the loopholes he paid to have written. He doesn't believe in the rules, only in rigging them. She looked out at the committee. How many working Americans have been audited over a $600 Venmo? Meanwhile, this man dodged billions. If we let this slide, we're telling the country the law only applies if you can't afford to buy your own. Thunderous applause broke out from the audience section, rare in a hearing like this. And Jasmine wasn't finished yet. Now, let's take a closer look at the emails, particularly the one where Thiel discusses asset concealment post-election. The room dimmed as the projector switched slides. Displayed on screen was an email dated November 10, 2020, just days after the presidential election. The sender, a senior advisor in Thiel's private trust. The recipient, Peter Thiel himself. Subject, Asset Shield Strategy, Post-Election Phase. Jasmine read aloud, Peter, with new leadership coming in, we recommend finalizing the Belize conversion and transferring the remaining holdings into the Quantum Trust proxy. Audit risk will rise in Q1. Also, Avoid triggering the SEC through public filings. Discretion is everything. The room sat in stunned silence. It wasn't coded. It wasn't subtle. It was a billionaire blueprint for dodging accountability. Jasmine continued, discretion is everything. That's the culture of corruption, hide it, shield it, bury it until it's too big to trace. She turned to Thiel's attorney. Are you going to tell us this email is fake? No comment at this time. Of course not. The committee chair, who had initially tried to downplay the hearing, now leaned forward. Congresswoman Crockett, how many of these emails do you have? Jasmine smiled. Over 200. And that's just the beginning. Every thread leads to another shell, another deception, another taxpayer-funded billionaire scam. News anchors outside scrambled to go live. Even traditionally neutral networks broke into coverage with banner headlines like, Crockett unloads on Thiel, discretion is everything, email shocks DC. But Jasmine still had one final act planned for the day. We'll now recess for 1 hour. When we return, I'll introduce legislation that will make sure this kind of fraud never happens again, and name it after the man who inspired it. She glanced toward the camera. The Thiel Loophole Shutdown Act. As the hearing broke for recess, chaos erupted across Washington. Inside Thiel's inner circle, panic turned to fury. Aides made urgent calls to friendly lawmakers, right-wing media, and crisis PR firms. One conservative senator took to the floor within minutes, calling the hearing a witch hunt against success. But it wasn't working. Public support for Jasmine Crockett was surging. Cable networks ran wall-to-wall coverage. Clips of her takedowns went viral on every social platform. Even skeptical pundits admitted, this isn't just posturing, she brought receipts. Back in her office, Jasmine reviewed her final plan. The bill, the Thiel Loophole Shutdown Act, would cap the tax-free growth of private stock in retirement accounts. Require full disclosure of offshore holdings above $10 million. Impose criminal penalties for intentional concealment of wealth through trusts. Ban financial advisors from structuring audit-proof tax plans. It was bold. It was aggressive. And it had teeth. Her staff hesitated. This will make enemies, Jasmine. Real ones. The kind that fight dirty. She didn't flinch. Let them come. If exposing this kind of rot makes me a target, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. As the hearing resumed, the cameras turned back on, and Jasmine took the mic with even more fire in her voice. This isn't about Peter Thiel anymore. It's about every American who pays their taxes, follows the rules, and gets nothing but audited, while billionaires write their own playbooks in the shadows. She held up the bill. This ends now. Within hours of Jasmine introducing the Thiel Loophole Shutdown Act, the political machine kicked into overdrive. Lobbyists representing hedge funds, tech giants, and private equity firms flooded Capitol Hill. Phones rang non-stop. One senator even admitted, I've never seen this much pressure in a single day, they're terrified this might actually pass. Meanwhile, Jasmine's inbox exploded with messages. Thousands of Americans wrote in to support her. Teachers. Veterans. Single moms. Even a few moderate Republicans crossed the aisle to privately say, you're doing what we were too scared to. But fear wasn't in Jasmine's vocabulary. That evening, she gave a live interview on national television. The anchor asked, are you afraid of political retaliation from billionaires like Peter Thiel? Her response was instant, I'm afraid of letting them win. Because if they can steal $6 billion and still buy silence, then we don't have a democracy. We have an auction. That quote ignited another social firestorm. A protest popped up outside the IRS building the next day with signs reading, Crockett fights for us. Tax the takers, not the workers. Meanwhile, back at the Capitol, word came in, Thiel had hired a former DOJ official to challenge the legality of the whistleblower's testimony. He was also bankrolling a super PAC aimed at attacking Crockett's credibility. Jasmine didn't blink. Let him waste his money. Because next week, we're calling his CFO to testify under oath. And this time, there would be no screen, just truth, cameras, and accountability. The following Wednesday, the hearing room was once again packed, standing room only. This time, the witness wasn't hiding behind a screen. It was Peter Thiel's former chief financial officer, Raymond Cutter. He arrived with his attorney, visibly nervous. After being sworn in, he sat before the committee as Jasmine Crockett leaned in, not aggressive, but surgical. Mr. Cutter, were you the CFO of Thiel Strategic Holdings from 2011 to 2022? Yes. Were you aware of the offshore trusts, asset shelters, and use of Roth IRAs to store pre-IPO stock valued at nearly zero? He hesitated. Then, yes. I was aware. Cameras zoomed in. Journalists scribbled wildly. Jasmine pressed harder. Did you ever raise concerns about the legality of these strategies? Once. In 2016. I was told, quote, "Don't worry, Peter has the IRS in his back pocket." The room exploded with murmurs. Jasmine held up a document. And this is your email expressing that concern? It is. And your signature is on the compliance waiver for the Cayman transfer? Yes. Do you believe this violated federal law? Cutter looked down. Then slowly nodded. I do now. Jasmine turned toward the rest of the committee. There you have it. First-hand confirmation. This wasn't clever tax planning, it was a calculated abuse of the system designed to enrich one man at the expense of every honest taxpayer. One of the senior congressmen whispered, "This is bigger than Enron." By day's end, Jasmine had subpoenaed 3 more Thiel executives and filed a formal request for a DOJ criminal referral. The billionaire was no longer untouchable. By the end of the week, Peter Thiel's financial empire began to crack. Major news outlets released exposés confirming Jasmine Crockett's claims. One investigation revealed that Thiel's educational nonprofits were secretly funneling funds into political dark money groups with offshore money, all while claiming tax-exempt status. The Securities and Exchange Commission announced a parallel probe. The Treasury Department opened a formal inquiry into the Roth IRA abuses. Even the DOJ, initially quiet, confirmed it had launched a white-collar criminal investigation. Behind the scenes, lawmakers who once protected Thiel began distancing themselves. Some even tried to take credit for Crockett's work, but the public wasn't buying it. Meanwhile, Jasmine's bill, the Thiel Loophole Shutdown Act, was co-sponsored by more than 40 members of Congress, including a handful of conservatives who faced immense public pressure from their districts. During a primetime speech on the House floor, Jasmine delivered a line that would be replayed for years. For too long, billionaires like Peter Thiel have used this system like their personal playground, while the rest of us play by the rules. No more. If this country is going to survive, we have to stop treating corruption like innovation. Thunderous applause erupted, not just from the chamber, but across the nation. People weren't just watching. They were cheering. Thiel's team launched a last-ditch PR campaign, calling Jasmine radical, vindictive, and uninformed. But the damage was done. The documents were real. The testimony was on record. The fraud was undeniable. And Jasmine Crockett? She was already preparing for the final move. 2 months later, Congress passed the Thiel Loophole Shutdown Act by a bipartisan margin that stunned the nation. It marked the most aggressive financial transparency reform in over 30 years, closing retirement account abuses, tightening offshore reporting laws, and placing hard limits on the kind of creative accounting that had made Peter Thiel a legend among the ultra-wealthy. That same week, the Department of Justice unsealed an indictment. United States versus Peter Thiel, on charges of tax fraud, conspiracy to defraud the U.S. government, and obstruction of federal investigations. Thiel's mugshot was splashed across every news outlet in America. Once a tech icon and political kingmaker, he now faced up to 20 years in prison. His attorneys tried to negotiate. Jasmine Crockett refused to back down. "Justice isn't for sale," she said in a press briefing. "Not anymore." As Thiel's assets were frozen and his political influence shattered, Jasmine walked through the Capitol building, greeted by staffers and even skeptical colleagues who now approached her with respect. She had done the unthinkable. Not just exposing corruption, but forcing real consequences. One reporter caught up with her outside the chamber. "Congresswoman Crockett, what's next?" She paused, then smiled. "One billionaire down. A few more to go." The crowd around her roared. And somewhere across the country, a young girl watching the news turned to her mother and said, "I want to be like her."